Good evening, everyone. We can settle into our seats. We can get started.
Yeah.
My name is Esther Van Wagner. I am an associate professor at the Faculty of Law at Helwig, and one of the lucky co-organizers of this event with my colleague Jordan Stanger-Ross, who's helping the camera capture this moment so we can share it with many others in the future. This is part of the City Talk series that the university supports to bring important conversations into the city, and we're very grateful for the different departments of the university, who I will thank shortly for doing that. But I would like to start out by introducing Willa Harry, who's the Director of Community Relations, Protocol, and Social Justice for the Aboriginal Coalition to End Homelessness Society, an Indigenous-led organization supporting Indigenous peoples experiencing homelessness, whose work is invaluable to the city and connects directly to our conversation tonight. And Willa has kindly agreed to help us start off in a good way and welcome us to the territory.
Good evening, everyone. My traditional name is Deltana. My name comes from the Fraser River people. That's where my mother's from. She married into one of the local nations of the West Saanich Territory people, Sail First Nation. Thank you for the invitation. I look forward to the conversation today. I've been working with the Aboriginal Coalition to End Homelessness for the past 5 years, working in all facets of the organization, from frontline worker to management of cultural mentorship to the detox program to frontline work and outreach services. I'm currently in the role of a director overseeing all of the programs to ensure that the cultural aspects are being adhered to, and because the majority of our population that we service are First Nations people that are unhoused. We currently have 4 houses now. One house has 45 people living in it. It's harm reduction housing, where we have a detox program on the top floor. The second house is an all-women's house for women that are fleeing violence who are unhoused. There's 22 of them living there. We recently opened a youth house for children that were aging out of care. We currently have 5 that are residents right now. Brand new program, all First Nations children. The brand new houses are Mama Babe's house called the Sacred Cradle. There's 12 units there for women that are overcoming their addictions and wanting to reunite their relationships with their babies who've been involved in the Ministry of Children and Families. So we're looking at all facets of the population for people who are at risk of being unhoused or who haven't been unhoused. So it's been wonderful, profound work. It's a vision of Fran Hunt Chinichi, and it's been really tough this year. She is on the verge of retiring this year, so she's done profound work over the past 15 years and done profound work with the University of Victoria as well, doing research work. But I'd like to hand the floor over to our local elder, Karen Harry, and she'll do the territorial acknowledgement.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Karen. My traditional name was given to me by my elders of the family as my late grandfather's name, who was a hereditary chief in Sale. I'm truly honored today to stand and welcome you to this gathering tonight and acknowledge the traditional territory of the Lekwungen, Songhees, Placenit peoples. We are housed throughout southern Vancouver Island, and we welcome everyone, and our jobs are to bridge our gaps of communication between our peoples, our neighbors, our friends, our visitors. So I really want to welcome you to tonight's gathering. I'm a mom, a grandma, a great-grandma. We have our mother at home. We're survivors of residential school. And I have to say, my grandson sends his regret to, who's going to drum and sing tonight to welcome you. And he was honored to bless this home a few months ago. And he's becoming quite well known for his welcoming, and he recently did a video for Island Health on why culture is so important to him. His name is Peyton Saya, so he sends his regrets tonight, but I'm really looking forward to the conversation tonight. I admire the work that's underway, and I truly honor the work that continues at the University of Victoria. We've hosted cultural awareness camps for the past 20 years with the Faculty of Law, and we've taken a break because there's so much work that's underway already. So I enjoy your evening, everyone, and have safe travel. Say a special prayer for the tragedies that are continuing in our world, and to the families who are grieving. Bye.
Thank you so much for helping us start off this important conversation. It's such a good day for your welcome. So now I'd like to ask Elizabeth Croft, the Vice President, Academic and Provost with the University of Victoria, who are the host of this City Talk event. And we've asked Elizabeth to say a few words on behalf of the university.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for starting us off in a good way. Really appreciate those wise words and the great work that you're doing. So I honor you. Thank you. And welcome everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people here, folks from the community, folks from the university together to talk about this, to listen and learn about this important topic. My name is Elizabeth Croft. I am the Vice President, Academic and Provost at the University of Victoria, which is such a pleasure to serve. And it is a wonderful pleasure to be able to welcome you today and tonight for the Cities Talk event. I also want to pay our respects to the Lekwungen, Massanis, and the Coxsackie peoples on whose territory the university stands, and the Lekwungen and Massanich peoples whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day. This is important framing for tonight's talk, which centers on housing insecurity and lived experience and the relationships and resilience that emerge from adversity and from deep systemic issues. It's also really tied to the land because that's where we live, and the land is so important. I want to thank Jordan very much for the invitation to come and welcome you tonight, and for the long-standing work through the City Talks to create spaces where scholarship, storytelling, and civic life meet. I'm also grateful to Esther, who I just met tonight. Thank you so much, our colleagues in law, in religious studies, and in the Center for the Study of Religion and Society, and to everyone else who helped bring this evening together, and of course to everyone who came out to support it. And of course I want to thank Maggie Helwig, here tonight to speak about her award-winning book, Encampment, Resistance, Grace, and an Unhoused Community, and I am very, very excited to listen to you. Events such as this demonstrate how important it is to come together as a community and for the university to be part of this community as we work to understand and address some of the most pressing and complex challenges of our time. There are few issues that are more urgent or frankly more visible than housing insecurity and the lived experiences of unhoused people in our communities. And we need to remember that at the core of this, as our students study, as we work together, that this is about people. This is about lives, relationships, and the conditions that shape those. Tonight's conversation invites us, and I commit to listening carefully, to reflecting ethically, and to considering how knowledge and compassion and action intersect. I hope that we will all enjoy and engage and think hard about the questions in community across our disciplines, across our experiences, our perspectives. And for me, I want to be able to take this back to our university to think about how in post-secondary education evenings like this can model what we do when we engage inside and outside of our classrooms. We are here because we care about these questions, and because we want to be thoughtful on how we can create a more compassionate world, a more just world, where all members of our community can thrive. I think that as we work together and help move each other forward together, we might just get there. So thank you everyone for being here, and I look forward to tonight's talk.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So you're here, of course, not to hear us speak, but to hear from our wonderful guests tonight. Just before I introduce them, I want to thank on behalf of Jordan and I, the Faculty of Law, Dean Craigie is here, supported this event alongside the Center for Religious Studies and the Religion, Culture, and Society program, so that individual faculties come together around important themes to support different city talks, and we're very grateful that those faculties came together for this one. So without further ado, tonight we have a conversation between our local celebrity, Gregor Craigie, the voice that I often hear first thing in the morning, and author Maggie Helwig. And I'll just take a few moments, although I imagine they need little introduction to most in the room. But Gregor Craigie is a journalist and has been so for 25 years at BBC World Service, CBC Radio, CBS Radio, and Public Radio International. Many in this room will know he's the host of On the Island, and every day brings us stories that are very relevant to our lives here on Vancouver Island, but that also resonate in many different communities, including the city of Toronto, where the book takes place. He's an award-winning author, including his latest books, focused squarely on the housing crisis, Our Crumbling Foundation, How We Solve the Housing Crisis, which is was a finalist for the BC and Yukon Book Prize, the Balsillie Prize for Public Policy, and the winner of the George Raya Award for BC Writing, or BC Writer who's achieved an outstanding degree of social awareness in a new book. The book is available alongside Encampment. Our wonderful bookstore folks are at the back with both books, so please go and visit them at the end if you're interested in reading more. And alongside Gregor here, we have Maggie Helwig, who is the award-winning author of 15 books and chapbooks, including Girls Fall Down, which was shortlisted for the Toronto Book Award and chosen as the One Book Toronto. Encampment, which we're here to hear about tonight, won the Toronto Book Award, notably the day before the encampment at St. Stephen's was evicted. Helwig is a longtime social justice activist, an Anglican priest, and the rector at the Church of St. Stephen's in the Field since 2013. And I was privileged to have Maggie visit my municipal law, housing, and unhousing class last night, where Encampment is one of our required readings. And the conversation that we were able to have was really a wonderful grounding for a new generation of lawyers who's going to go out and think about how to do the careful listening and advocating and walking with folks who are facing housing precarity and who are unhoused and who are the experts in their lives. And we learned a great deal from Maggie about how to do that walking alongside. And I just wanted to take a moment to share one part of the book that really I was thinking about after our conversation last night about how to do that walking alongside work. In an excerpt from one of the sermon experts, Maggie says, "We are the witnesses now, whether or not we feel adequate to the task, whether or not we even want it. We've been made and loved and named. Go into the world, live out the story that the hungry will be fed, and the prisoners will be released, and all the designs of power will fail, and the garden will come back to the city, and the green things rise again." I think what we're here to think about and talk about is how witnessing and walking alongside each other is an act of compassion, a necessary act, an act of care, an act of love, and how we are going to do that together in this city and in all the places we call home. So thank you so much for being here to participate in that conversation with me.
I am really sorry. I thought I was going to mess this on page.
Yes, okay. Yes, no problem. I could keep reading.
Don't worry, I'm prepared for exactly this kind of emergency. It's currently 12 degrees in Victoria, 7 in Tofino with partially foggy conditions. The BC Ferries right now, so I'm sailing away. First one tomorrow morning. It gets a bit old, doesn't it? I'm going to say a little preamble, which I was not going to say, and Maggie will be abrupt at cutting me off, because I want to hear from her. Having written a book about housing and homelessness at our Craigie Foundation, which is back there, I obviously care a lot about this, but the thing that drew me to Maggie's book immediately was the personal nature about this. It is walking alongside, living with people who are struggling in the most difficult of times. Is this a good time to end it, to bring you along? Or it is open. Well, if it's,
I honestly don't know. I think she's struggling without men, so I may have to. Sure. I have to walk her in.
yeah, we'll absolutely roll with it. And is your microphone on? So, Maggie, we'll just you've got, like, you're a caregiver by nature, as many priests are, and as it becomes apparent in this book. Can I ask you to start us off with a reading for the book?
I was thinking about what to read. There's a few passages I read. I'm going to read from the very end of the book. Just give me a minute. I'm really sorry. This is really...
I actually forgot something I wanted to say. There are some other folks at the back that I wanted to introduce. So there's some information about other organizations that are doing work in this area. So Ensign Neighbors Supporting Unhoused Neighbors has some information about the work that they do. The Existence Project has some information. Island Health is here with some harm reduction. So please visit those tables, visit our friends, think about how you might want to be involved in this work if you aren't already, or share the ways you are involved with the folks who are here tonight sharing that work with us. So thank you for the chance to do that.
Okay, the book is about a roughly 2-year period of what actually ended up being a 4-year story. It ends at a point when there's been a partial clearing and the encampment has been reduced to a very small number of people. In fact, it grew back again into a significantly larger number, and we went through the whole cycle again with the city, and as Esther said, in October this year, the day after I won the Toronto Book Award, the city fully cleared out the encampment, surrounded the churchyard with an 8-foot security fence, covered it with gigantic concrete blocks, and parked a private security car across the street 24/7 for 3 months. We've been told it is now a zero-tolerance site. But the end of the book kind of speaks to that moment as well. It has been a very difficult time for all of us, obviously, but I'll read the last couple of pages. Is it a story of defeat then in the end? To the extent that we were not able to preserve the churchyard as a place of sanctuary, I suppose it is. The stability that people achieved there has been lost for at least some. And almost everyone is still living in an encampment, just in a different one. And certainly neither we nor anyone else has been able to turn around a vast political and economic system that is more and more devoted to protecting the wealth of the very few, as most people and the planet as a whole fall deeper into chaos. But the we, the church, the encampment residents, the we that is all of us, held that space for more than 2 years is not nothing. One Sunday in early August, as we were setting up for an outdoor service in Bellevue Square Park, Jeff asked me, "Do you remember that ship we built? Like the time we built that ship in the churchyard out of wooden skids, remember?" I didn't remember exactly such a thing, but Jeff had created any number of constructions, so I nodded. "Well," he said, almost whispering, "I've heard that they dug it up 2 million years in the future, and it was completely the same. It was perfect." That's pretty amazing, isn't it? "It is," I said. "It really is. 2 million years in the future. Just think about it. That ship we built, completely the same." And while we may not have built a ship out of wooden skids exactly, we did build a little ark in the yard for a while. A place of refuge against the flood. A place where we preserved what we could. In some unimaginable future, somewhere the other side of the coming floods and the fire next time, will someone remember it? Will someone dig it up and find it still perfect? I cannot say that this may not be true.
Thank you, Maggie. And that's the end of the book. Can we back up? And I wonder if you can tell us about this encampment, this refuge. How did it start? How did it come to be that the churchyard of St. Stephen in the Field in Toronto ended up being a home to people with nowhere else to call home?
Well, I think one of the pieces of context that's really important is that the churchyard of St. Stephen in the Fields has been a place that people have gone for refuge, for sanctuary, for decades, long before I was there. There's never been a time in my time at St. Stephen's, which is 13 years now, that there haven't been 1 or 2 people at least sleeping in the yard. There is a letter in the files from sometime in the early 90s, I think, may have been late 80s. Doctors Hospital writing to the priest of St. Stephen's at the time saying there are too many homeless people sleeping around your church. And the priest writing back to say, what kind of hospital even are you? At the Christmas Eve service this year, someone came in who we hadn't seen before, an older man, and he said, I just wanted you to know when I came to Toronto, I was homeless, and this churchyard is the first place I slept. So I wanted to come back and say hi. So there's a whole history there. So there wasn't one point when suddenly we had people sleeping in the yard. We always had people sleeping in the yard, and just gradually, especially in 2022, and especially after the big violent clearings of some of the large park encampments, gradually we had more and more people. At one point I went away for a couple of weeks on vacation, and I came back, and it was like, man, this has really exploded in the last 2 weeks. But it just happened, and it happened in a way very naturally, and it's like, okay, well, this is what we're doing now. So.
And were you fully accepting, or was there any part of you that thought, no, this is going to be too difficult, too much? You've got other things to do.
No, I mean, like I say, I think it was the only thought was, well, apparently this is what we're doing now. That's kind of how I always approach ministry. It's like something's going to happen. Things happen in the world, things happen in the church, things come into your building, things come into your yard, and you're like, okay, this is what we're doing now. So that was what we're doing now.
How did it fit with your faith as a Christian, with you being an Anglican priest?
Well, the church should be, and at its best historically, has been a place of unconditional safety and sanctuary for anyone who asks for it. That is part of the history of the church. It's a history we have often not lived up to and denied. But it's a fundamental part of what our identity should be. And, you know, theologically, academically, even before I started at St. Stephen's, I was really interested in Rowan Williams, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury and a very academic theologian, reflecting on undefended space and how, and I think he meant this in a very abstract and conceptual way. The church should be undefended space where all of humanity is welcome because there's no need to defend God against anything. That is one of those weird things that Christians do. They think they're supposed to be defending God against stuff. Like, okay, this is God. You're not, God doesn't need you looking at him. But, like I say, the Rowan Williams his thinking about undefended space, defenseless space, was very theoretical and very academic, but the encampment in the churchyard was one way of actually living that out in our day-to-day life.
And so you came back, was it when you were cycling on Prince Edward Island? And you came back and you saw, well, there's a lot more people here. This is a real, or a bigger encampment. How quickly did it become apparent to you that this would cause friction? And I don't mean that it was wrong or that it was a problem, but when did you realize, was it an immediate recognition, this will be tension with the city and house neighbors and so on?
No, perhaps naively, I didn't immediately think that because we're in Kensington Market. And Kensington Market's an old punk anarchist kind of lawless zone. So I just figured, well, it's Kensington Market, so who's going to have a problem? And then we started getting letters of complaint, mostly from one house across the street. They were trying to sell the house, and it was up for like $2 million or whatever insane sum. And obviously they were seeing the encampment as lowering the resale value of the house. So that was where the first complaints came from. And then a police officer knocked on the door one day and said, "You have to come to a meeting with the community because this encampment is destroying their lives." So I'm like, what? And when did the police invite me to a community meeting? This is just weird. That meeting never happened, but it was shortly after that the city started contacting us, and we entered into this weird dance where for a long time they wouldn't actually say they wanted the encampment gone, and it was like, we just have to talk about, you know, how we can find solutions for people, which, like, that would be great. Find actual solutions for people, awesome. We would be totally on board with that, which wasn't really what they were talking about, of course. But it was a dance that went on for a long, long time in various ways, and I would say in the last year, sort of after the book, the neighborhood tensions got much sharper, and I think a lot of that has to do with a lot of new people moving into the area, and a lot of people who moved into the area because it kind of had this sort of bohemian reputation, and they want to live somewhere that has just like this little edge of romantic poverty, but they don't want actual poor walking around on the streets. So that it did get much more tense between us and neighbors, most of whom were quite new to the area.
And how did there was a school nearby, I think Montessori, how did that factor into all of this?
Yeah, the Montessori school has been, yeah. It's a private school. The kids get dropped off there in expensive cars. Their parents live, 4 blocks away and drive their expensive cars down into Kensington Market and drop their kids off at the school. And the building is owned by the city. They get a sweetheart rent from the city to have a private school for people who can pay a lot of money to send their kids to a Montessori school. And they have been among the most hostile, not the only ones, but among the most hostile and the most consistently hostile. And Like, there was one incident where somebody, not an encampment resident, as it happened, but somebody had a really bad moment near the encampment. And he was, you know, he was freaking out, and I wasn't there. I arrived after it was all over, but apparently he was telling the children that they were fucking crybabies. Yeah, this is what a couple of people have said. They probably were fucking crybabies. And the parents were terrified, and there was a whole thing, and then the police showed up and took the guy to the hospital, and everybody in the encampment was like, who even was that guy? I don't even know. But that story got told and retold and blown up into this thing where the children were chased down the street by a man who may even have had a weapon, who knows, and the husband of the director of the school cries. Like, every time I see this man, he cries. And he would tell that story, and he would cry at the threat to the little children. I mean, I care about little children, but the people in the encampment are not the threat to little children.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, because you were obviously concerned and became friends with people in the encampment who were at the most vulnerable situation imaginable. But did any of the concerns that were brought to you from housed neighbors or people associated with Montessori or city officials, did any of them resonate with you, where you thought, well, that is a fair point, fair concern?
Yeah, I think garbage is a real concern, but garbage is a concern that could be mitigated. Garbage is a concern that could be managed. I mean, we would be in this weird cycle where garbage would build up, and then the city would write to us and say, you know, well, once again, garbage has accumulated in the encampment, so we're going to have to send a crew to clean it up. Well, can you imagine if, you know, in your home, you know, you accumulate your garbage as you go about your life, and you put it out on the curb, and every couple of weeks the city phones you and says, well, I see that your garbage has accumulated again, so I guess we're going to have to come and service your home again at taxpayer expense. That's exactly what it's like. You know, you create garbage by going about your daily life, and if the city had been more regular and more routine in helping people maintain clean conditions, we would not have had nearly so many problems with garbage flowing out into the sidewalk. It was a real problem, but a problem open to mitigation. And we did have one summer where a couple were having a real loud, angry relationship right now. And it would have been better for everybody if they had had a private place where they could have had that, because many of us have been through this. Many of us have done the screaming and dish throwing and everything else, but they had to do it out on the sidewalk in front of everybody. And I understand that's really unpleasant to listen to, and I'm sorry that the neighbors had to listen to it, but it's not that they were uniquely bad or troubled people, it was that they had no private space to have their private business.
Just as a journalist, I've spoken to many people who have no home, and many in encampments as well, and the one that keeps coming to mind is the former one across the road from the cathedral here about 10 years ago. And I spoke to all sorts of people, but the one concern that really stuck with me was speaking to the fire officials, who seemed pretty, I mean, in this case, pretty relaxed. But when you looked at some of the specific tents and detritus around, it seemed to me they had a legitimate concern. How did that issue come up, and how did you think, or how was it dealt with, and how did you think it ought to have been dealt with?
I think fire concern has been weaponized. I think, obviously, fire is a concern. Far, far more people have died in fires in houses than have ever died in fires in encampments. We don't go from that to saying, well, obviously we should eliminate houses. But people do go from a fire in an encampment to we should eliminate encampments because they are a fire risk. And fire is being used now as the big hammer in Toronto, as the thing that nobody can argue against, the thing that nobody can legally resist, the thing that you know, they can bring extremely serious provincial offense charges against you. So they really are weaponizing the threat of fire. It is a real threat, but again, we have never been able to have a meaningful conversation about mitigation. And that's what you do with houses. That's what you do with rooming houses. That's what you do with situations where there's high fire risk. You look at mitigating. When we distributed fire extinguishers to the encampment residents, the city confiscated them. So if you're going to be confiscating fire extinguishers from people in encampments, it seems to me you have forfeited your right to talk about fire risk as a reason for addicting.
Let me ask you about one more, and I don't want to sit here with a long litany of complaints that you've heard and that we hear in Victoria, but the one other one that gets me, and I've been told specifically, it's easy for you, you're a tall, middle-aged man, you feel safe walking beside an encampment. I've been told this by a number of women. I don't feel safe. That's why we can't just let encampments go unchecked. I've heard this from many people. Have you heard that sentiment? I presume that I don't feel safe.
I hear that. I find it extremely confusing. What do you think is going to happen? Realistically, really, do you think somebody is going to just jump up from his tent and jump on you in the street and sexually assault you? No, it's going to be somebody you know who's going to sexually assault you. It's going to be somebody in your family, or it's going to be somebody close to you. That's where the vast majority of sexual assaults happen. That's where the vast majority of any kind of assaults happen. People in encampments are just trying to survive. They're not interested in getting into it with passers-by. I mean, I'm white, I have white hair, I'm a priest, so I do have some privileges. But I have never felt unsafe. I have never been unsafe. I feel like, and I've talked to my outreach worker about this. My outreach worker is a young non-binary person who is usually read as female. And they feel much, much less safe going in and out of the building now that the encampment is gone. When the encampment was there, they felt really confident that if anybody came along who wanted to try anything, like pirate would be on them in a second. There were people there looking out for us.
This is Pirate, one of the
residents. One of the residents, yeah. I've always felt protected by the encampment rather than made unsafe by it. And, you know, there are now studies coming out that demonstrate that encampments do not lead to increased crime. They do not lead to increased violence. That's a public perception which is created by repeating the same one story over and over and over as if it had happened 100 times.
When you mentioned pirates, there was a point where you mentioned specifically Jeff, pirate, Robin, the artist, enriched your life.
Yeah. How so? Well, how do people enrich our lives? I mean, we're all enriched by our relationships with each other. The artist has an incredible poetic imagination and a way of putting things. And she would just say things to me as I walked by her in the morning that were wise and poetic and astonishing. And Robin to me is someone who is an example of someone who has been through so much suffering and so much affliction and retained such sweetness. And Jeff, one day I came through the encampment and Jeff was sitting there with a tiny little baby bird in his hands. And he said, you know, I found him in the street and I picked him up, and you know what, I know he's probably not going to make it, but at least he's going to be somewhere warm with somebody who loves him when he goes.
Was it Jeff who had the dog?
It was Jeff, yes. Jeff was the one with the dog.
You write very compassionately about how being homeless is loss. One loss after the other loss after the other loss. Can you tell us about Jeff and his dog?
I mean, it's hard to summarize the story. It's, you know, it's in the book and it's in detail because it needs to be in detail. But Jeff had a dog he had for very long time, and very, very attached to him. They were extremely close. You could see the dog loved him, and he loved the dog, and the dog got very sick. Just one of those older dog things, not anybody's fault, but he was very sick, and we were working with Jeff around, you know, he's not going to be here forever, and what are we going to do, and how are we going to make it something that you can live through. And then somebody kidnapped the dog. Somebody kidnapped the dog. We never got the dog back, we never got his body back, we never had any definite information about exactly what had happened. So Jeff was so traumatized by this, and it was a trauma that he couldn't work through because he never had closure, and he still doesn't believe the dog is dead. And that the dog was dying. But, you know, he still talks about it. He still talks about it a lot. It's this incredible wound, and as far as we can figure out, it's a woman who was going around kidnapping dogs off homeless people. And she probably thought she was doing something good, you know. She's like, oh, these homeless people, they don't look after their dogs. I'm going to take their dogs and sell them to people who will look after them properly. But, yeah, the level, you know, Jeff was damaged by that so seriously. I don't know if he's ever fully going to recover.
What do you think would be a better alternative? I wonder what you hope for, I mean, whether it's Jeff, Pirate, Robin, and the artist, or others you don't name. What's your hope for them?
Well, I can't have a hope for a broad, like, what this is, you can't talk about a category of people as if they all want or need the same thing, okay? So, no, I don't have one hope for all people who are homeless in Kensington Market. They want to be different things. They're individuals.
Is there no universal to that? I mean, like a
No.
fixed, stable home, a fixed home, or maybe not?
No, I think when you have been living on the street for 20 years or 30 years, as some people have, a home indoors is not necessarily a thing that you particularly connect to anymore. It's not a way of life you're used to. It's not a way of life that necessarily seems particularly appealing. I think somebody like Pirate especially, who has superb survival skills and has been living on the street for about 30 years, what he wants is just to be left alone to do his thing. And he does it pretty well. You know, he's managing pretty well. There will always be some people who actually do not particularly want to live indoors. It's going to be a small number of people, but it's real. It's very real, and I think that needs to be respected.
And for those who do?
For those who do, we need housing solutions which treat them like adults with dignity and autonomy. And now, we don't have enough housing of any kind. We don't have, period, full stop. The problem is we don't have enough housing. But what we do have, when it's, you know, the rent year to income, the supportive housing, it's usually run in a way which assumes that the people who need this kind of housing are a problem, and that they need to be contained and controlled and bound in by a bunch of rules. And that's one reason that people have found encampments to be a sustaining way to live, because they have dignity, they have autonomy, they can create a community, they can create rules which are their own rules and which make sense, rather than, you know, you have a bed check at 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. and 10 a.m. and if you miss a bed check, you can be out. Or you can't have friends come and visit your room. An awful lot of supportive housing projects are run with rules which include you can't have a friend visit your room. That's not a human life. That's not how human beings are. So we need more housing, you know. Bottom line, we hugely need more housing. We need a lot more housing. but we also need to stop treating people who are unhoused as if they are some weird combination of infants and criminals.
We will open it up if you'd like to ask Maggie anything in just a moment, just to let you know, and we'll run around the microphone so you don't have to yell. Maggie, can I ask you to read a paragraph that really struck me, and you can take your time to set this up if you like. It's on page 80 at the end of the chapter. It's the final paragraph. And I wonder if you read it for us.
Yeah, this is a paragraph which comes out of some very specific incidents, but it also really does, in a way, touch on the core of the whole book. It's from a chapter which is about 2018, which was a very strange year in Toronto. It was at the beginning of 2018, Bruce McArthur, the serial killer in the gay village, was arrested. And he had been preying on a number of vulnerable populations, which included homeless men involved in sex work. And included a couple of people who were from my neighborhood and my community. And so the whole investigation and the release of the bodies and the memorial services was all something we were dealing with. And it was just a year where like a lot of people were dying in different ways. One guy just fell down the stairway in his rooming house, and he was in a coma for a couple of weeks. And I was sitting in his hospital room because his parents didn't want him to be alone when he died. And I was sitting in his hospital room when there was the van attack in North Toronto, when this guy started driving his van at women in North Toronto and killed a lot of people, mostly women. And that was happening, and then a friend took his own life late in the year, and also that same year my father died. So it was a year of a lot of death and trauma and grief. Even beyond the kind of daily death and trauma and grief of people who are very marginalized. But this is the final paragraph of the chapter. We are all broken, and only community has a hope of reassembling us. The activist community around my dead friend, the queer community and its survival through every plague and all the acts of violence, the small communities of my family, Isaac's rooming house, and the church. And if some people, even more marginalized than the others, have found their place of reassembling in a circle of tents, if this has helped them become once more a human body whole, I cannot deny them this.
Was that the guiding principle? Is that why you kept helping? Because this was, you were going through difficult periods in your own life, but you kept helping the people in need outside your church's door.
I guess that was why. I mean, I just do what I do. I theorize it afterwards. I mean, everything I say in here about theological rationales and everything that I think about community and all these things, these are all real things, but that comes after the doing stuff, not before. I don't think, because I have this theological or political belief, therefore I must do this thing. I just do things and then I figure out why I do them.
If you'd like to ask a question, we certainly welcome it. And I think, Sarah, you okay to run around? Sarah's going to do her Phil, or George, someone's going to do Phil Donahue impression. So just raise your hand, because we don't like to hear you.
I'm a person that has lots of questions, but I'll ask the first one. So I haven't read the book, but I'm wondering how your congregation supported you and how you supported them to do this work, this mission, in your community, because congregations, as far as I understand them, and even in the most liberal congregations, there can be conflict about the direction that the church is going, or the minister is going. So how did that work?
We're a really unusual parish. The parish has been doing this work for a really long time, and it's been doing it not in the traditional church way of, you know, we're nice church people and we're helping people because that's what Jesus wants us to do, because Jesus was very helpful, I guess. But in a way of really being very close to the street, and never, I think, feeling that the congregation was somehow separated from the rest of the life of the community. And that goes back very deep in the parish character. So I think it was as automatic for them as it was for me. It's like, there's people in our yard, well, we help them. There's people in our yard, we feed them, we get to know them, we ask them what they need, because that's what we do. That's our role in the community. And they're part of us and we're part of them. And like, there's not a bright line distinction between the congregation and people we're helping. You know, lots of people who come to worship services are people who are homeless or marginalized, living in our encampment or other encampments. And there are others who aren't. There's like academics, there's somebody who actually works at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, there's lots of different kinds of people, but there's much less of that separation. In terms of how the congregation supported me, I mean, they're great people. They're great people. And I couldn't have done any of this without being part of a whole team of people. I didn't do anything on my own or by myself. Everything in this book is the work of a bunch of people, not ever just me.
So the next question I have in relationship to your relationship with the encampment and your congregation. So you're saying people of like mind were participating in the life of the church. So have you had any experience in neighborhoods where neighborhoods are people living on a street that they can afford, and encampments happening close to those neighborhoods, and how do those neighborhoods who are not made out of a congregation with the same sort of intention in faith to serve, how do they come to...
I don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
Well, the question is, a neighborhood ends up with an encampment, but it's not like-minded people in that neighborhood that are facing the problem.
And what?
So do you have any experience in communities in Toronto where neighborhoods...
I only live and work in one community in Toronto. And there were, of course, as I've said in the book and in this discussion, there were people who were very hostile to us. Was I able to make them less hostile? Mostly no. I'm not particularly good at that. I try to outsource that work to other people.
But I would love to hear what the daily life looks like for you and the congregation and the people in the encampment. Like, did they use the church for the bathrooms and the showers, and how did you feed them? And I don't know, you probably explained it in the book.
We don't have showers. We're a very small church in a very old, rundown building without a lot of facilities. So we don't have showers. People use the bathrooms, of course. There is an agency called the Neighborhood Group right around the corner, and they have a lot of what the church doesn't have. You know, they have showers, they serve breakfast and lunch 6 days a week. We serve 2 breakfasts a week and 1 dinner. So we're more filling in the gaps around the neighborhood group. And they also have medical staff on site there sometimes. We also had the street nurses from Inner City Health Associates come and visit the encampment. So that was also one, you know, people were getting primary care that way as well. It's actually been, since the encampment was evicted, we've been doing a lot more clothing distribution, a lot more primary medical care, because people are in a situation of much greater need and because it is much harder for service providers to find them. And you have to have really good, long-standing relationships with people to know where they're going to be when they've been driven into hiding. Or, you know, they need to come and look for you, and for that to happen, they need to really trust you a lot. So that people's connections with some things have been severed by the encampment eviction. So we're doing a lot more clothing now, and we're doing a huge amount of primary medical care. It's hard to say day to day because no 2 days are exactly the same. But people would move back and forth between the neighborhood group and us kind of over the course of the day. They'd sort of kind of hang around TNG in the morning and then come back to the encampment in the afternoon, evening. And, you know, in the cold weather, we would sometimes try to organize the people in the congregation who were real late night people could come in and refill people's hot water bottles to help them stay warm in the really cold weather. And, you know, it just sort of, things shift with the seasons and with different patterns of need and all kinds of things. That answers some of the questions.
One of the things I'm interested in is how you deal with the issue of police and drugs. Because we have over here, the provincial government tried to make it so that you wouldn't be busted for small amounts. Well, the general public wasn't standing for it, that sort of away. But the drug issue is rather huge. How does that, Ontario's got different laws, so how does that work?
We have different laws. We actually have a provincial government which is much more hostile. But within the city of Toronto, I think the police are much less interested in enforcing drug laws than they are. I don't know whether they've decided it's just too much work. I mean, we are seeing more pressure now, but there is no question that everywhere homeless people are over-policed. Get an incredibly out of proportion amount of attention from the police, but it tends not to be about drugs. It tends to be about a perception that every single thing that gets stolen within the entire Kensington Market neighborhood is being stolen by the 10 people in the encampment. And the number of times that the police just sort of come into the encampment looking for a bike, or, you know, just grabbing everybody's bikes. Like, this bike stolen, this bike stolen, this bike. I think the actual hub of harassment is bicycles, which is weird. There's surprisingly less policing of public drug use. The province is very, very, very interested in trying to crack down. but so far, it has not become the same kind of hub of over-policing. I think there are indications it's starting to move that way, but it's a different sort of dynamic that we're dealing with. Does that make sense? Is that what you were asking, or were you asking how do we deal with drugs? Yeah, I think the over-policing is much more drug-oriented here and much more theft and assault-oriented. Lots of, accusations of theft and assault more than the kind of really excessive policing of public drug use that happens here. It feels like it's a little different in Toronto. Certainly, drug users who have no private place to use get harassed by police in Toronto as well, but I don't think to the extent that it happens here.
Can you speak to how dangerous it can be for an encampment and people residing in it to be displaced and sweeps?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. In every circumstance that I am aware of, being displaced from an encampment has done harm to people's mental and physical health. In every case that I'm aware of, and sometimes very serious harm. When our encampment was displaced in October, 3 of the residents ended up in hospital within 48 hours. There is no question that forcible displacement, having your home ripped up and taken away from you, is a trauma, and it also leaves people very defenseless. They have nowhere to go. They're much more exposed to harassment. Our people were kind of scattered around the neighborhood. One very vulnerable person tried to sleep in the alleyway, and a local business came and started harassing them, and they didn't know where to go. The first 24, 48 hours, everybody was at a loss, and it was really scary. And it is a tremendously damaging thing to do to people, because there's no question encampments are people's homes. They are homes in a very meaningful sense. And somebody suddenly comes in and says, I'm throwing her home in a trash compactor, go find somewhere else to be. Yeah, it's going to do tremendous damage, and it's going to be absolutely a thing that endangers people very significantly.
You mentioned by closing me about the claw very quickly, how this was done.
Yeah, in Toronto, what they use in encampments is a compact excavator, which somehow or other the name for it has become the claw. Everybody calls it the claw. Apparently, one of the reasons they use the claw is because city staff have very bizarre superstitions about needles. And, this whole idea that if you walk by fentanyl in the street, you're going to die. But it's this big excavating tool that just comes in and kind of looms over and just grabs tents and possessions and everything and pulls them up and throws them in a trash compactor. And even when people have voluntarily left their tents, which sometimes for various reasons people do, having the claw come in and rip them up is still traumatizing. Watching the claw work, and I have watched the claw work a bunch of times, it is just in and of itself a traumatizing experience.
I did read the book, and I think everybody should read the book. I recommended it for city classes. In particular, your explanation, description of the Monty Python-esque thinking behind policy making is just, everybody needs to see how that doesn't work. No, how it works. Yeah, everybody read that book.
Yeah, and and it's very hard to summarize because you kind of have to experience the layers and layers and layers of absurdity of it. The first chapter of the book is just sort of trying to lay some of that out, and the Walrus wanted to run an excerpt from the sort of first chapter, and they said, we just run a bit of this to give people the idea, and I said, no, you run it all or none of it, because to give people the idea, you have to show them how one thing piles on another, and another, and another, and another, and another. And this is a really tiny example, but it's just, you know, imagine it multiplied by 1,000. During one of the extreme cold wears this winter, because Toronto's been having the polar vortex this winter, it's been a terrible winter. A couple of Streets to Homes outreach workers showed up at the church, and I don't know where Streets to Homes gets their people, but they always seem like they're really confused that they're working for Streets to Homes. And they come in with this sort of, they seem like people who've like been dragged out of their bed at 3 in the morning and told, you work for Streets to Homes now, go to this address. And that's all the training they've had. Anyway, they show up at the church in this sort of confused fashion. They're like, hi, we're here to see if anyone wants to go inside to like a warming center or something. And I said, well, is there any room in the warming centers? Because my understanding is that they're well over 100% capacity and they physically can't fit in any more people. And she was like, oh, I don't know. I said, well, maybe could you check if there is space before we go around asking people if they want a space? And she's like, okay, I'll call my supervisor. And she talked to her supervisor, came back. My supervisor says we can't check whether there's any space until we have a named individual who wants a space. Okay. So you want me to go around and say to everybody, so hey guys, Streets to Homes is here, and they say there might be space in the warming centers, and then again there might not, but if somebody gives them their name, they might be able to check whether there's space in the warming centers. Anybody interested in this? You know, everybody. And so the Streets to Homes worker's like, okay, I'll just report that nobody wanted to go indoors. And then the city comes back and says, well, we sent out our street patrols and nobody wanted to go indoors. You know, and it's just, it's like that times 1,000.
Thank you so much for coming and for your book. And I wanted to ask about how the book actually got written and your choice to write the book. Did you keep a journal during these years, or did you take a week off after all of this and get it all down in 1 week? And why didn't you leave it between you and God and the people who were ministering?
Well, it wasn't my idea to write the book. An editor at U of T Press actually said, why don't you write a book about the encampment? And I said, well, I don't know, I'd have to think about that, because there's a lot of risk in that. You know, I'm a person with certain kinds of privilege, writing about people who have far less privilege than me, and there's a lot of ways that can go very wrong. But I went down to the encampment, because that was when there still were quite a lot of people in the encampment, and I said, so I'm thinking of writing a book about this place and about my experiences here, what do you think? And they all thought it was a good idea. So I thought, well, okay, maybe it's something I should do, because I have, you know, I have certain kinds of skills, and even more importantly, I have access. You know, I've already published a bunch of books. I have access which other people don't, and maybe I can use that to amplify their voices. So that was how the decision to write the book happened. And then I didn't publish it with U of T Press. I published it with Coach House because I liked them more. I keep a very, very intermittent journal. So some of this comes from things I've written in a journal, some of it, you know, at a certain point I started realizing I needed to document my conversations with the city because the city was telling lies. So some of it is stuff that I was just documenting as it went along so that we would have our side of the story down and recorded. Some of it is from emails that I was sending to other people in the church. You know, it's a lot of sources. So it was very fast to write. Partly because a lot of the information was already there one way or another, and partly because there was just this need to actually express all this in this kind of outpouring rage, really. So it was, yeah, by far the fastest book to write that I've ever written.
Thank you for your talk tonight, and I wish I could have attended your talk at the law school yesterday. I was wondering on that line if you see a role for the legal system of legal workers in addressing this crisis.
I'm sure that there is. I think there may be people in the room who are much better qualified than me to address that. But, you know, we tried to work with lawyers. It didn't work for us. But the Waterloo Region Legal Aid won an important precedent. And they're currently bringing another case which is trying to build on that precedent and close some of the loopholes in the Justice Valente's decision. And our neighborhood safe consumption site right now is only open because a couple of law firms have been working with them on a charter challenge against the provincial government's attempt to shut them down. So there absolutely have been situations in which lawyers and the whole that whole route have been very helpful. It's also, honestly, like our people spend so much time dealing with complete bullshit charges. And having lawyers who are willing to actually have unhoused people as their clients and help them negotiate these nonsense charges that can mess their lives up for years. You know, we have a couple of people who actually do have relationships with lawyers they've known for some time and who actually do work with them, and that's really important too. I think this person has had his hand up 3 times.
Thanks for noticing. I wanted to ask you to speak in a little more depth about the aftermath of the cloth. And to give a little background here, a bunch of us who are here tonight, when the pandemic started, we didn't know what else to do, so we wandered into the park and we started developing relationships with people. And then we met each other and we started meeting with each other. And you know, and I know a number of folks here who have developed really deep and personal relationships with folks and have been there when all their stuff goes away. And you know, my mom's ashes are gone, my ID's gone, everything's gone. And it's really a really deep human encounter that you go through and develop these relationships and help people one-on-one in that way. There's something in the book that felt deeper to me that came out of this connection of community in that sanctuary. And, you know, those folks like the artist and others who, when they lost everything, the way that you were there processing the trauma with them, which I don't think we have an opportunity to do in a lot of the outreach work that we do here. It's really time consuming and it's your neighbor. And you know, you've got to be ready to take that text and in the middle of a talk because that person needs it. So can you talk a little bit? There was something really special to me about that.
Yeah, I think that may be where we're in a kind of privileged position in that, I mean, A, we're a church, so this is literally what we do. And B, we have the neighborhood group right around the corner, and they're doing a lot of the practical heavy lifting. And I think we've always seen our role as, in a sense, TNG does a lot of the practical stuff, and we are there for the trauma and the grief and the anger and the creativity and And all the more abstract, all those parts of being human. I think I've always felt like that, in a sense, was our niche, and that's how we kind of add our particular value to what the great work that TNG is doing. Is we're the place where there's time to process some of all this stuff, and we're still trying very hard to be that place. It's harder now that people aren't allowed to live there, but we're still trying really, really hard to be the space where people can be and to be open. We have a drop-in every Friday night, and that's our kind of invariable. But people come in other times too. And we're also trying to do things like, we don't want what was in the space to be forgotten. Just a week after the encampment was evicted, a bunch of the volunteers did a whole magnificent chalk art installation. And there were slogans and there were drawings, and it covered the whole church, the church wall and the pavement and every bit that they could reach. And the great big slogan that they chalked right across the sidewalk was, "A community was here." And we don't want that to be forgotten. Some people have just applied for a grant for an outdoor exhibition of artwork by people who lived in the encampment that would be exhibited in that same space and would be called "A Community Was Here."
And that feels like really deep healing for the folks living there, but for you too. And then when that keeps getting reenacted over and over again, and people are re-traumatized, that's the part that's overwhelming.
It can be, yeah. And I for a lot of us, I think the period after the October 17th eviction was a very hard time. We've also gone over the fence a couple of times to do rituals inside the fence. We did a All Souls Day ritual for the people who had connected to the encampment who had died in the last year. We did a fire ritual to remember them on All Souls inside the fence. And then we did our Christmas pageant inside the fence, which the city found out about that and sent us an email saying, please don't do that. The integrity of the fence is very important. But they didn't actually do anything, because I think it actually occurred even to the city of Toronto that the optics of arresting Joseph and Mary and the baby in a churchyard on Christmas Eve would be not great for them. They're pretty bad at optics, but I think they figure that one out.
Hi, Maggie. I saw a very good documentary a while ago on, I can't remember if it was Finland or a country that, one of the Scandinavian countries that's almost eliminated homelessness. Finland, yeah. And it really gets me when people say, oh, it's complicated. I don't think it's complicated at all. Like the thing is, do you ever see, to me it's just like we get so far and then people put the stops on because they want to keep things the way they are. And I guess, can you comment on that, like to do with, capitalism or our society and its classism?
And I comment on capitalism in our society. I think this may be too big for me to address. Yeah, I mean, we are caught up in a horrifically evil capitalist system that is grinding everybody up and destroying the planet, and apparently seems to be unstoppable. And I think that is why so much of what I do and think about has come to be about small-scale community building. Because if any of us are going to survive, And if any of us are going to be able to rebuild anything out of the wreckage, it is going to be because we have learned how to do small-scale community building, and we have learned how to live together as communities which can survive affliction.
Thank you, Maggie and Gregor, both for a really, I think, important evening. Maggie, I'm wondering, I'm thinking about coalition building, and maybe to keep it local, if I just think about that Montessori school or the neighbors across the street trying to sell their property. Have you experienced, or do you see a possibility for reaching people who see this problem differently, who view the whole situation quite differently from yourself? Is there a prospect of joining together with people like that to generate a more compassionate and just approach, or have you have you given up on that prospect?
I feel like we tried. We've got a lot of neighborhood support, by the way. There are people in the neighborhood who hate us, but we also have a lot of neighborhood support. I just need to make that clear. But the people who are really adamantly opposed to the encampment, to the church, to the neighborhood group, to everything we do, I feel like we tried. We sat down with people from the Montessori school and tried to say, can we find some common ground, some common interest, and then they just broke every agreement we thought we had. And I don't know. And as I said earlier, I don't think that's my skill either. I've always had other people either with me or instead of me trying to do that, because I'm not good at it. But none of this has actually succeeded. The people who have been opposed to what we're doing have gotten more and more opposed and more angry and more entitled. And we go to meetings that they organize that they call community meetings, but they only invite the people that they know are hostile, so we get screamed at for 2 hours, and then everybody says, well, I think we've had a very constructive meeting in this way. So I would like to think so, but I haven't seen a lot. I haven't seen a lot of movement.
I'm visiting Victoria, so I feel very happy that I got to listen tonight. The one sentence in your book that always stuck with me, and I'm going to paraphrase, is something like, people in the community are most afraid of fire, people in the encampment are most afraid of freezing to death. And that really just cements in my mind. So I've worked in the food insecurity sector, nonprofit, for about 12 years, and so that's connected to unhoused people a lot, of course. The one thing that's always struck me, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on it, is the people that I meet that have very little have a lot of humor and a lot of generosity. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Absolutely. And a lot of that's why I'm just, I so much enjoy spending time with people who are unhoused, people who are marginalized, because that's where there's so much unforced goodness. And, my friend Ellie, who lives in a rooming house, so he's got housing of the sort, and he's very aware that that's something he's got that lots of other people don't, and that's all he's got. He doesn't have much more than that. But, if you give him a cookie, he is going to break that cookie in half and give the other half to somebody else. Invariably. And humor, absolutely. Just funny, insightful, clever people. It's just, it's a great community of people, and it's a community with a very, very deep goodness.
Thank you very much for coming. I've read the book and enjoyed it, learned a lot about the kind of community that you've created. It's just terrific. what I'm wondering is, are you anomalous? Or are there other people in your church, or have you had a chance to talk to anybody in the Anglican Church here in Victoria who want to know more about what you're doing, because we have such a difficult time here?
By in my church, do you mean my parish, or do you mean the Diocese of Toronto?
Well, I mean...
As in my parish, absolutely, there's lots of people who are doing work at a time.
Are there any, like, have you had any, do others in the Anglican Church, say in Canada, contact you about what you're doing and how you're doing?
Yes, they do. I mean, we have a few churches that are doing very similar stuff to us. And we just, we trade notes, we commiserate. But yes, there are a lot of other churches who are getting in touch with me. And in fact, I had yesterday afternoon a Zoom meeting with a number of clergy and some lay people from the Diocese of Algoma. And one of the questions they asked, one person said, "So how can we support you in your work?" And I said, don't support me in what I'm doing. I've got my community and we're actually doing okay. Find the need in your own communities and do it there. And I think we are seeing more of that. I think partly just because things are getting so bad everywhere. I think I'm seeing Anglican churches and some other churches are starting to step up in a more meaningful way, or that we collect mittens for poor children at Christmas sort of way. I'm seeing more Anglican dioceses where there is a social justice officer on staff, and that is increasingly seen as something that needs to be built into the work of the church. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if the church as an institution is even going to survive. We've done a great deal of evil. A great deal of evil. And will we survive as an institution? Maybe not, and maybe we don't deserve to. But will there be people of all kinds of faith traditions who are going to be out there at the rock face as we try to survive? Yes, I think there will be.
Seems we may have run out of questions. We probably have time for one or two more, but while there's a lull here, I have a question of my own. Last night in the class, when you visited, we had, I think, a really important conversation about shelters. And I think that, the way that shelters get spoken about as a solution to encampments, that's kind of the proper place for someone who is outside, is really problematic, but it kind of quiets down some of the public outcry about why is this happening. And you talked about the importance of not talking about shelters as housing, and I wondered if you could speak a little bit about that tonight.
Yeah, I don't know if this happens elsewhere. I suspect it does. The city of Toronto consistently uses the word housing when they mean a bed in an emergency shelter. And they will say, oh yes, we cleared the encampment, but everyone was offered housing. Like, no, they were not. Everyone was offered some kind of bed in an emergency shelter. Maybe a shelter that was so far out of the catchment area that they wouldn't be able to work with any of their housing workers anymore. Maybe a shelter that doesn't fit their accessibility needs. Maybe a shelter from which they have already been banned. Maybe a shelter where they can't go with their partner, but they've been offered some kind of shelter bed. And then the city says they were offered housing, and that gets in the newspaper, and people who are dubious about encampments see, oh, they were offered housing and they turned it down. And I have had city staff, and admittedly the person who said this is no longer working for the city, but city staff said these people could be in housing right now if they wanted to, but they'd rather do drugs. Like, on what level does that make any sense? Most drug use happens in houses. People in houses are using drugs all the time. If they were in houses, they would use drugs in their houses and not get busted for it. But, you know, emergency shelters were meant to be a temporary stopgap solution, and they have become so institutionalized. People are now living in these big dormitory emergency shelters for basically their entire adult lives. There's nowhere you move on to from these shelters. And every night in the city of Toronto, something like 10,000 people are sleeping in emergency shelter before you start counting the winter emergency respite system. And how are we as a society okay with a situation where 10,000 people every night are sleeping in emergency shelters, and that's not nearly enough? And we know there are thousands more sleeping on the streets. And shelters are not safe or healthy environments. Many people will preferentially choose to be in an encampment rather than a shelter because encampments are safer and they are healthier. Encampments are where you can choose who you're living alongside. You can choose to live by somebody that you trust to look after your stuff. You don't have a curfew. You don't have somebody coming into your room at 3 a.m. to make sure you're still there. You don't have to follow a lot of bullshit rules like you can smoke in that stairwell but not that stairwell, and if you smoke in that stairwell you get evicted. There's less disease transmission, there's less violence. I think, you know, anybody inside the system knows shelters are unsafe and dangerous on all kinds of levels, and encampments are cold. The big problem with encampments is it gets really, really cold. But aside from that, it is in many ways a more dignified way to live.
Thank you very much, both of you, for being here, for writing these books, and for sharing what you've learned with the general population. I supported an encampment in Beacon Hill Park during the pandemic. Supporting an encampment is an act of resistance, a community resistance. So now that it's all said and done, is there any strategies that you wish you would have done differently, or you think now would have been more helpful, or is there anything that you think you could have tweaked to help the encampment stay longer or sustain longer?
I don't know. I ask myself all the time. I think about all kinds of things that I might have done better, that might have protected the encampment more. I tried everything I could think of. I wrote the book partly to try to protect the encampment. Obviously, it didn't work. But at the same time, I also know that we are a small group of church people and unhoused people looking after each other, and the city of Toronto and the province of Ontario are great big powerful machines. And ultimately, if they decide that they are going to drive the encampment out and replace it with concrete blocks, finally we are not going to be able to stop them. I was hoping that we could wield enough embarrassment against them to stop them, because that was really the only weapon we've ever had. But it didn't work. So, yeah, I don't know.
Thank you so much.
I was just going to say, here in Victoria, the word is indoors. We're going to move people indoors. So they don't say housing, because they know that that would be a bridge too far.
Yeah, they use indoors sometimes in Toronto too. Every time there's an extreme cold order, they go around saying, well, we're sending out teams to encourage people to come indoors. And I'm like, what? There's no indoors for people to come to. How can you even say that? But yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your engagement and your really great questions. I'll just ask Gregor and Maggie whether you have any last things you'd want to say or reflect on the evening before we finish up.
No, thank you all. Thank you all very much. Like, the weirdest thing for me about doing events outside of Toronto is I don't have anyone from the encampment with me. And that's always a very strange feeling. Because I feel like this is not just my book. This book belongs to the whole community, and I'm accountable to the community. And it feels weird not having them with me, but I haven't felt nearly as much like that here, because I feel like there are people here with a depth of lived experience who are also keeping me accountable, so thank you all very much.
Thank you for coming, everybody, and Maggie, thank you for coming to Toronto for this book.
Thank you.